Recording. Okay. So I also want to apologize that I had not uploaded any of these in a few weeks, so I will be uploading if you actually those people who are watching. We left off. We're learning the last final story, or say the 13 foundational stories called the 7 Beggars. And we left off at this sort of like bridge. Like I was saying, this is like a transitional moment in the story, and we're going to try to figure out what this has to do. What one part has to do with the rest of the story, because the rest of the story just kind of goes off in a completely different direction, as if the first story didn't happen. So we learned that the king's son, basically, although he was good, fell into heretical thoughts, because the more he entertained his intellect, the more he branched into hachamot, like intellectual pursuits without foundation in emunah, faith, the more he fell. The more the kingdom fell, right? So now, we transition to now, I'll read in English. Now it came to pass that all the people of a certain country fled. In their flight, they passed through a certain forest, where a boy and girl went lost. One person lost a boy, and another lost a girl. They were young children of about 4 or 5 years old. They had nothing to eat, so they shouted and cried, for they had nothing to eat. Now, Rebbe Nachman focuses their being lost within the forest. We've seen other stories where the forest becomes a very integral part of the redemptive process. Right, the forest is sort of like, psychology calls it biophilia, like we have this connection, human beings, to nature. And Rebbe Nachman understands that. Right? We've learned a few times, I go back to, the lesson number 11 in the second part of the Kutimah, where Rebbe Nachman says when you're speaking to God, you go out to the forest, and the produce kind of encourages and carries your prayers to the Creator. And I think what Rebbe Nachman's touching upon there is this biophilia of this natural need, pardon the pun, of our connection to the natural world. That the sparks of holiness, and what those means are there's activating circumstances within the forest that allow us to transcend who we really are, who we think we are, until who we really are. And that's pretty reasonable. I think every traditional culture has that concept. We in the Western world have forgotten that. I'm not surprised when looking at this little paragraph here that this story now takes place in the forest. And those of us who've read The Master of Prayer, it begins the redemptive process for the community begins in the forest, because the Master of Prayer takes everybody to the forest to pray. The Arizal would go out to the forest to welcome the Shabbat. The Pardes, it's like a big area. The Pardes is that is the place of the fruit trees. There's also an acronym. There you go. An acronym for Pshat, Remez, Drush, Shod. There's the 4 levels of understanding the Torah. So the Pardes, the forest, the idea of being one with nature is a redemptive process.
So Pardes more an orchard, or is it also a wild forest?
It's an orchard.
Okay.
Orchard, but I think we get the idea.
Yeah.
I think we get the idea. Like in permaculture, it's all the same, right? It's like, kind of like, it's. And so we have the tepuchim, the apples of the Pardes, which the Arizal spoke about, being this, spot. And so this idea, very holy idea. So it's not surprising the redemptive process in the story really does begin, the engine of that begins in the forest. The return to who we are, the expulsion of the heresies, possibly that of before. We lose our intellectuality in the forest or in the fields. And it's not surprising the Lost Princess, when he goes through forests and fields, He doesn't find her. He has to go to the path to the side. But that's part of the process of reconnecting, of finding oneself again, to being reconnected to the authentic self versus what society puts on us.
So I just made a kind of strange connection with the cultural thing. You know, the movie Ushpizim.
Yeah.
So Moshe Balanga, when they cut the etrog, the diamond, he runs to the forest.
Yes.
You know, because he's trying to get that new part of himself, overcome the angered old part of himself. And I never noticed that before. He goes to the forest.
Yes, very nice. Very nice. That's part of it. That's definitely part of it. It's definitely part of it. Meanwhile, beggar. This is the seven beggars. The bettler. In Yiddish, it's the bettler. A beggar passed by carrying his bags of bread. These children approached him and tagged after him. They followed him. He gave them bread to eat, and they ate. Where are you from? He asked. And they said, we don't know. Since they were young children, 4 or 5, right? He went to walk away from them, but they asked him to take them with him. He said, no, I'll not take you with me, he said. Suddenly they noticed he was blind. And this amazed them. Since he is blind, how is he able to get around? He's in the middle of the forest, he's blind, how is he getting around? And their very amazement was in fact amazing, since they were only young children, but they were very clever children. He blessed them that they should be like him. They should become old as he is. He left them some bread to eat and went on. The children understood that God is protecting them in the forest, right? And had sent this blind beggar to give them food. But the bread eventually finished, and again they began to shout for food. It became night, and they went to sleep. In the morning they still had no food, so they shouted and cried. A deaf beggar then passed by. They began speaking with him, but he gestured with his hands that he does not hear. He gave them some bread to eat and went to go on. They wanted him to take them with him, but he did not want to, and he too blessed them that they should be like him. He left them with more bread and went on. Eventually this bread also finished, and they again shouted. This time a stuttering beggar passed by. They began speaking with him, and he stuttered in response. They did not know what he was saying. He understood what they were saying, but they did not know what he was saying. Since he stuttered, he gave them bread and went to go on. He too blessed them that they should be like him, and he went on as above. Then a beggar with a crooked neck passed by, and the same thing happened as above. Then a hunchback beggar passed by, and a beggar without hands, and a beggar without feet. Each one of them gave them bread and blessed them. They should be like him, exactly as above. Eventually their bread finished, so they began walking towards civilization. Hebrew says, I'll translate. It's important because the English doesn't capture as much as afterwards their bread ran out, and they went to go to a yeshuv, to a community. Here it's a civilization. It's important. It's the same language as the Lost Princess, where it says he goes to the path of the side. Maybe there's a yeshuv there. We understand that yeshuv oftentimes means yeshuv dat, being, in a state of contemplation or contentment. Yeshuv dat is contentment, mental contentment. And we saw that's Hibodadu brings you to a level of yeshuv dat, having contentment. So they're going to a yeshuv, right? They want to get to a place where there's stabilization. The forest that they're in is meant to lead them to a level of contentment, of being content mentally, calmness. how do you say it? Self-awareness. I mean, yes, that is self-awareness. It's amazing how the parallels in this story into the Lost Princess. They reached a certain path and walked along this path until they reached a certain village. Once again, Hebrew ad shaba'ula ezederech, hu ad oto derech. They went along this particular path until they finally said they went until they found a path. They went along this path. Ad shaba'ula ezekfar, and they found a village. But we remember that in the beginning of the Lost Princess, he's walking along a path because he thinks there's a yeshuv there. It's a similar. Rebbe Nachman said, he's doing it on purpose. There are paradigms he wants us to understand the world in. That the forest brings you breakthrough, but you have to begin to move from the forest in real life, right, back into civilization. You can't just be a forest dweller. You have to take the light of the forest, of the hitbodedut in the forest, and bring it into a level of yeshuv, into a level of yeshuv dat, self-awareness, ultimately social awareness, social impact. The children went over to one of the houses, and the residents had compassion on them and gave them some bread. Imagine these poor little 5-year-olds walking around asking for bread. They continued and went over to another house, and these people too gave them bread. They continued on from door to door, realizing that this was a good idea for them, so they became beggars also. They agreed between them to always remain together, this boy and girl. See where this is going. They made large sacks for themselves to go around from door to door. They also attended all celebrations such as circumcision and wedding feasts. It's actually quite beautiful, right? These two little 5-year-old boy and girl walking around doing this together. Eventually they went on elsewhere. They went to cities where they also went from door to door. They also went to fairs where they sat with other beggars near the walls holding a plate. Eventually these children became well known among all the beggars. They were all acquainted with them, and they knew that they were the children who had gotten lost in the forest. That's what they were known as. One time there was a large fair in a certain city. The beggars went there. I'm reading through this part because we're going to get, there's stages in this story, and this is the stage of the introduction of the beggars, and then we're going to deal with each beggar unto themselves. So. One time there was a large fair in a certain city. The beggars went there, and these children went there as well. The beggars then had an idea to make a match, a shidduch, between these children to get them married. They should marry each other. As soon as some of the beggars mentioned this, all of them thought this was an excellent idea, so they sealed the match. A shidduch. But how would they make them a wedding? After discussion, they decided that on the king's upcoming public birthday party, they would all go there, and whatever they would collect there, such as meat and bread, would go towards the wedding, and that is what they did. All the beggars went to the king's birthday party and asked for bread and meat. They also collected the leftover meat, bread from the party. Then they went and dug a big ditch that would hold 100 people. They covered it with reeds, earth, and garbage. They all entered and made a wedding for these children, bringing them under the chuppah canopy. The rejoicing was very great. Okay. Now at their wedding. Everything Rebbe Nachman speaks about, one of Rebbe Nachman's very famous teachings is that everything in the world is a reflection of the Creator's will in conversation to us. Meaning whatever I personally am going through, the Creator is expressing that his conversation with me within terms of the creation itself, right? That's in the 54th lesson. Just one of the times he mentions it. The idea that every moment Hashem is speaking to us through the creation. I'm saying this and bringing this in because I think it's important to understand that And you have to picture yourself into a young Rabbi Nachman's mind. I'm talking about when he was 7, 8, 9 years old, and he's growing up in Medjugorje, and those of us who have been in Medjugorje, the first thing I noticed when I was there the first time was how understanding a bit of the background and how he grew up there and the stories, it was remarkable that as a young boy, he must have looked out at the landscape, and some of these stories already began to appear to him, even as a young boy, even though he came out with them later on. Why am I saying that? Because, well, first of all, his own life, his father, and his mother. His father was an orphan boy, and his mother was the daughter of Udal, of the granddaughter of the Baal Shem Tov. And Simcha was an orphan, and they grew up in the house together as 4 or 5 years old. And of course, we know who made the shidduch. Obviously, his mother made the shidduch, but he grew up with his zivug already. And so Rebbe Nachman looks out and understands that all this is Hashem speaking to him to give him these deep concepts. There's 2 ways Torah can happen, right? And one doesn't override the other, just people work in different ways. So there's the Torah of the book, and that's important. But the Torah from within, of the soul, that if we're attuned to ourselves, we can look out at the creation, and that creation gives us the messages that God wants. Those of us who are working those ways have Torah from within, also have what within. Whereas the physical Torah is there to trigger those people who don't have that. So Rabbi Nachman looked out at the world and said, look, wow, this is like a great revelation of Hashem's light into my life. Another one I can think of is, there's a huge castle. So there's the village of Medjugorje is still pretty small, and the Jewish area where Rabbi Nachman would have grown up. You're basically in the distance looking at this massive castle. It's actually foreboding. It's from the early years, and we understand that seems apparently that's the castle and the Lost Princess, right? Like just another example. Like if someone's very understands Hashem speaking these ideas out through the Bria itself. That's where the Avot, fathers, patriarchs and matriarchs understood this. How they have Torah. They're able to see it in the universe. So Nachman says that he goes in Hebrew, "Ani kan chadash v'yayin yashan." I'm a new container with a very old wine. Meaning I'm bringing you these old ideas in a very new way. That's why he says the world is the world is subjective, not objective, because the way I perceive the universe is the way Hashem is speaking to the universe, to me. Sorry. Anyway, so that's what's going on here. The story is actually rooted in Rebbe Nachman's life. And this is Fega and Simcha to a certain degree, to a certain level. Obviously, there's the Pardes, right? That's the Pshat he's seeing in the universe. Pshat is it's Fega and Simcha. There's levels to this Pardes, but he's bringing that in to now give us an idea. Yeah, other you think of the Kruthim on top of the cherubs on top of the Arno Kodesh. Right, this is what's the Arno Kodesh itself? That's the gateway to the other worlds. It's the gateway to that's the point in time where the spinning sword that blocks us from getting back to Gan Eden doesn't exist there. Which is why you can have direct communication at that point. It doesn't exist there. So here there's a unity of Geula here in this.
Was there a reason why they had to do it undercover, like dig a ditch so big, cover it? But normally the Chuppah is outside under the stars, right? Is there something with that in the story?
I haven't seen it. Huh? I mean, my thoughts is that my thoughts on that represents the klipot. That represents the it's called in modern parlance the cognitive distortions that we have in our brains. That's what klipot are, really. Ultimately, we'll take a psychoanalytical point of this whole thing. We have these distortions in our mind, so that's the garbage that our lives are. But that's the darkness that's found. It's the light that's found with all the darkness. We've seen these, that's the ultimate. That's the approach of Chassidut, that the world of this dark, crazy world that we are in there's this goodness in it also. And the only reason why we see the darkness is because of that sword that keeps on, that hasn't been taken down yet. It's guarding the entrance to Gan Eden, because it's flipping over on purpose because the world is all upside down. And that's the only thing I can think of. I mean, that's off the top of my head. I haven't seen a Perush on it, no. I'll look though. Although, let me just get the Hebrew in here. Yeah, this is what I just said is actually it's similar to Rav Shikta here. The depth comes from, Rav Shik says here, the depth comes from the couple has depth to them. The whole ability for the interconnectivity between the two is a deep idea. It's not something that's just like a super. So the reason why the whole had to be deep is it's to represent this idea that the married couple, in order to actually have interconnectivity, has to go really deep. It's a deep thing. It's not something that's just like a superficial relationship. That's interesting. So I'm one of the Hebrews. I want you guys to understand. They were very joyous, very, very joyous. Right? Everybody around them was joyous, and the Hatan and Kala were joyous. What do we learn from the Hacham and the Kam? With all the time's growth, the foundation of everything is Simcha. It's Simcha. And so we're not going to bring this out again. Simcha is this like key factor in this like in the universe, and that we can't get anywhere without it. And those of us, we've all gone through these kind of situations in life where we lose our simcha, and then we lose our ability to have a growth, and that's when the cognitive distortions come back. The klipot, and that's all because of the hechle timurot, which is that spinning. Right, that's the chambers of flipping, which is the spinning sword in the Gan Eden. That's set up when we leave Gan Eden. When we leave Gan Eden, the world gets all weird, and so that is this whole. It's trying to constantly push us from a level of simcha. Because we have to have simcha, we have to have joy. And without that, we can't actually serve Hashem. We can't actually come back. We can't. And I think that's where now that I think about it, that's where this idea of being deep. The depth behind the zug is that it's hard to get past all the muck and mire of the world in order to get into this true relationship. Another thing to think about is that if you want to take a deeper level, instead of Simcha and Fega, which is his parents, deeper level here is this idea of the tzaddik and the idea of the Shekhinah, right? She's the divine presence, and he's this the tzaddik that's bringing this unification between the Am Yisrael and the divine presence. And that we've learned also, Rav Nachman and Sharon says, that the Adamah, the land of Eretz Yisrael, is where this lost princess is found, i.e. the divine presence. Meaning they're digging down to find something deep within themselves. And that's what we have to do as human beings. We have no choice. Those of us who either, I guess, are physically B'nai Yisrael, or those who have the awareness of B'nai Yisrael, which is also consciousness, right? So like, this idea that we're going to dig deep in our lives to find lost princesses is something that's really what it's all about. The Saba says that the butler is here in the story is the Tzaddik, is Rebbe Nachman. So the idea of the Tzaddik being the matchmaker. Tzaddik being the one that brings on Yisrael and the divine presence together. Because he shows the way. He digs the hole for them. Right. Okay, we're gonna finish. We're gonna read into the first part of the next one. We're not gonna discuss it. If we start discussing it, it's gonna be like it's a very long story, though, as you can tell. The bridegroom and bride were also very happy, but then they began to recall the kindness that God had done for them in the forest, and they wept and yearned greatly. They wept and yearned greatly. No, this is what they yearned for. If only the first beggar who gave us bread in the forest was here, the blind one. They want to have him. These are the Sheva Brachot, right? Right? They remember the Yitchilu lizkor hasadim she'asai mehem Hashem yitbarach v'yotam biyar. They remember the chasadim, zikaron. We talk about this of memory. They have this idea of memory. They remember. They remember this point in time where things were very simple and Hashem was able to give them everything they needed by way of the Asadik. They cried, right? Bochim, the Rebbe Nachman talks about crying a lot in terms of salvation. They're crying. And this is like, we've often said that Rebbe Nachman packs the stories full of a lot of his eitzot, his advice, and the lessons from the Likutei Moharan. So we see it here, they began to remember, zikaron, the chasadim, the kindnesses that was done with them, that God did with them, in the yar, in the forest. V'hayu bochim, and they cried. V'hayu mitgageim ma'od. Gagu'ah, for Rebbe Nachman, is a key part of Avodas Hashem. Serving Kodesh Baruch Hu, we have to yearn. And gagu'ah means you're yearning. You don't get anywhere without yearning. You're yearning for a better marriage, you're yearning for a better relationship with children, you're yearning for a better job, you're yearning for a simcha. That's all begins with a cheshik, the desire. But gagu'ah means I'm yearning. I want to have a yearning. So it's amazing, right? They're yearning, crying, they're yearning. How is this blind beggar? How are we going to get the blind beggar here? How are we going to get this blind beggar that gave us food in the forest? What else do we remember? The viceroy at the end of the story of Lost Princess starts crying. He knows she exists. He starts crying. And then boop, and what do we see here? The techef miyad, immediately. Within their yearning, translated directly, I think it's a very nice translation. The Hebrew is very powerful. Within their gagu'ah, with their mitgagein, within their yearning for this blind beggar, Anava Amar, Hineni, I'm here. Wow. I'm showed up. Bati etzlechem al hatan. I came to your wedding. Va'ani noten lechem matana, and I'm going to give you a gift. Midrasha. Shitiyus kenim k'moni, that you should be old like me. Ki b'tchila brachti etchem b'zeh. In the beginning, I blessed you. Right? Remember this? He blesses them to be old. That blesses them to be old. But akshav, and now, and noten lechem zot b'matana gemura l'drasha. I'm actually giving you this power to be old like me. Now we understand what's going on. Shtichiu chayim aruchim k'moni, that you should live a long life like me. Rebbe Nachman teaches there's no such thing as time. It's in our head. No such thing as time. Without going deeper into it, there's a lesson on living many years, and that's where the stories are explained part of that lesson now. But living many years, even though you can live like 20 years, but you're really living a lot of years. It really matters what you do with your time, right? That's the whole. I mean, I'm watering it down, but that's for time's sake, what you do with your years. So he's giving them a blessing at a young age to be old like him. I mean, what's interesting about this is also Rebbe Nachman says, "Don't be a zaken, don't be an old person." It's very interesting. We'll understand what he means by zaken here. It doesn't mean the zaken that we understand him to be. It's just the zaken b'tikkun, in rectification in terms of holiness, not zaken in terms of old. I don't know, I have the ability to pray like I used to. Like that's what Rebbe Nachman's talking about there. Don't just be locked into one way of thinking. That's the zaken. That's the older. That's being old. Don't always have to be young. You always have to be ready to change, day to day. Don't be locked into the things. Don't serve Hashem out of rote. So he's giving this to them as a matana. That you should have a long life like me. You think I'm really blind? You're blind? Remember they said it's very weird these blinds going around the forest. Think I'm blind? I'm not blind at all. The entire world is just like that for me. Nothing. There's no time. No time. We all know it. We all know it. There's no time. It's on our heads. Because how is it sometimes 24 hours seems like forever, sometimes 24 hours seems like not. I mean, there's no time. Like everything else that Rebbe Nachman teaches about the structure of the universe, it's subjective. It's whatever we project upon it at any given moment, which makes dealing with other people very hard, nearly impossible. And now we're about to enter into a story within a story. In English. Why does he say it's for him it's like a blink of an eye? Why? Because he doesn't focus his sight on the world at all. He doesn't look at the world. He's blind in terms of what's going on in the world, meaning in terms of the universe. His sight is beyond it. Because the entire time of the world's existence is not even like the blink of an eye for him. Therefore, focusing or even seeing this world is not possible for him at all. This is incredible. I am very old, but I am truly young. In fact, I have not begun to live at all, yet I am very old. And not only do I say this, but I have the approbation of the great ego. Let me tell you a story. I was going to a story within a story. Story within a story. We're going to have more stories. Right. Yeah, blind beggars are the story. That's why I want to stop here and give a kind of a little overview because we're about to head into his story. Every beggar is like this. Okay, and a lot of the beggars will go into stories within the stories. All right, so it's gonna get wild. I often think about the Space Odyssey 2001. When Dave Bowman's going from a baby to an old man, and it's like all over the place. And I think it happens in 2010 too. But like that's what I think of here. Like I'm old, I'm young, I haven't begun to live yet. I mean, he's going to explain this a bit, but there's some deep ideas here in terms of our physical age is kind of meaningless, and we know this in our own lives. We all know this. We all feel that our own lives are sort of dependent on how we decide to live them. You have very old people that are like out of step with things. By the time you're like 15, 20, 19, 20, they're all kind of burnt out already. And then we have this idea of every day is a new day. And therefore I'm always young. I haven't begun to live yet. Like living in this relationship is when you begin to get old. I always have my life ahead of me. Because there's no real time. Who I was yesterday is not who I am today. The present is really the only thing that matters. Of course, we have the Western world who tries to remind us of all of the faults everybody has and all our problems and how the world's really bad and like. But really, like, the present is all that matters. How you interact with it, that's right. And that there's no time. So because there's no time, I can always change. I can always be better. I still remember my first Ashana Numan, and I heard this idea of starting again. And I wanted to, and I didn't like Haidaf and Musaf, in Rosh Hashanah. So I just did it again. I think it would get me down. It's a very powerful idea that what happens before is already gone. So what in the world am I like, letting hold me down? It's a very hard thing to do. It's like, mindfulness is not easy. And Rabbeinu was like, was the master at it, but it's not like, it's not easy. Which is how you can be old and young at the same time. He'll explain it, but the idea that the world in of itself does not hold him down, that he's always starting to live that. My tafkid, my purpose today might be different from the purpose before. That's what's going on. One day it's all crazy amount of tests, the next day it's nothing. It doesn't really matter anyway. Those of us who believe in God and an afterlife, it doesn't really matter. At the end of the day. I'm very old, but I'm truly young. I'm very old, but I'm truly young. Abraham Avinu was very old, but he was truly young. Sarah Aminu dies and marries Keturah. So it's over. And then how many years after that? The neshama, yeah. The neshama. The message is the ratzon. That's this physical reality that we live in. It doesn't mean that it's not transcendent also. It just means that that's more, has a physical quality to it. Yeah, the neshama allows us, in truth, the nefesh is also like that, but in a different way, because it says the nefesh is ratzon, it's will. It's the will to do something. It's very simple. It's the will to do something in this world. So the will to do something in this world could be pulled down by being a zaken, by being old about everything. That I'm just stuck in my ways. That's what the zaken means. Oh, I'm stuck in my ways. I'm stuck in this mode, this paradigm. And being young means I don't have to be. It's always cool to be young. It's always cool to be young. But yeah, it's the neshama. The neshama is saying, listen, you're transcendent. Which fits into Rebbe Nachman's idea of having zikaron. It's odd because having zikaron means that I remember all my past, but that's not what it means. It means having zikaron to the time before I was in the physical body. Having a zikaron, having a memory of how things should be, which means being timeless. It's not having zikaron, a memory of this planet we're in. No, he wants you to forget that. He's always like that. Pain, just let it go. Let it go. Affirm your reality right now. Affirm your reality right now. But the zikaron, the memory is, no, I want to remember where I was in the olam al-emunah, in the world of faith, where there was timelessness, but I wasn't bound to a time. That's the zikaron, that's the memory. That's where he wants people to get to. So we're going to stop here. It's intense. It's going to get crazier. But it's good. It's good. It's an amazing story. So we're always blessed to be timeless.
Amen.
Blessed to be timeless. Never age.